Bitcoin gets lumped in with all that because if you're not spending time learning about crypto and Bitcoin in particular, you're not spending time peeling the onion to find out that, okay, on the surface, this thing is sketchy because it's young and it is rebellious. But when you peel back that surface level of the onion, and that dirty peel, and then you realize actually there's structure and layers here, and that's true with Bitcoin. Of oh wow, this has merit. This has very deliberate design.
Hello and welcome to Bitcoin with Jake. This is a podcast all about people's personal journeys to Bitcoin. I wanted to know more about the people converging on this new form of money. Why do they see value in it? What skills enable their understanding? How is it changing their lives? If you're a founder looking for funding or an investor looking to make investments, then please reach out as I develop my network in the space. Do me a favor and chuck us a 5-star rating on whichever app you're using to listen, or a like if you're watching it somewhere. As insignificant as this may seem, they help a startup project like this hugely. Lastly, if you have any questions at all, please just reach out. The easiest place to find me is on Twitter at Jake E.S. Woodhouse. Now, I'd like to take a quick moment to talk about our sponsor. Fastbitcoins are a Bitcoin exchange who you should definitely take a look at next time you're thinking of making a Bitcoin purchase. They're a great team, which for me is always the key to due diligence, whilst their product has a ton of features useful to every Bitcoiner. Check out my episodes with Danny Brewster, the founder CEO, and Nathan Smith, the chief compliance officer, to learn more about the people behind the brand. Thank you to Fastbitcoins for sponsoring the show. Now, on to today's episode. Today I'm speaking with Jesse Myers, but probably better known to most as Croesus. Welcome, sir. How are you?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me on.
No, my absolute pleasure. And I'm so excited to hear about your journey to Bitcoin. And that's what this podcast is all about. So yeah, I'll keep it simple to kick things off. You heard about Bitcoin at some point. What was that like? When was that? What were you doing at the time? And teach us a little bit about what brought you to Bitcoin.
Yeah, interesting. So I certainly heard about Bitcoin at some point in like 2013 when it was doing its thing in that early bull market. But I was working as a management consultant and, very much busy and no time to look into these things. So it only registered at that point in time as a thing that I missed out on, something that had, I was wise enough to not want to buy in after the price had gone from $10 to $1,000. But I wish I had been on that ride. And that was the full extent of it in 2013. And I didn't think about it at all anymore. And then I went and got an MBA, and a few of my classmates were buzzing about this new thing called Ethereum in 2016, in spring 2016. And so at first I was like, oh, what's that? It sounds ridiculous. But then the greed, I guess, of that investment proposition of what Ethereum stands for, and is the narrative around it of trying to improve on Bitcoin by like throwing more flashy tech at it all, that I don't resonated with my greed, I guess, of like, okay, here's this up and coming thing that could be the Facebook to Bitcoin's MySpace, or whatever narrative you want to tell yourself like that. And so I bought some, and I bought at the local top in 2016, and then was down 50% for the next 9 months. And then Ethereum took off. And as it started to go up, I started to pay way more attention to cryptocurrencies in general. And that led me down the whole altcoin path, because I was already, I came in with this mindset of like, Ethereum is going to outpace Bitcoin, because of technology. Like that was the extent of the thesis. And then that set me on the like altcoin, quote unquote, innovation investment path. And so I was focused on altcoins through 2017. And then of course got wrecked in 2018, holding these things that I had conviction were technological innovations, because I think they have some cool flashy technology, but you don't really realize that that technology is unimportant. That technology is
Mm.
completely irrelevant to the core purpose of Bitcoin and the reason that Bitcoin has value, which is that it is money that is the original and only instance of digital scarcity, the invention of absolute scarcity, and a dematerialized gold that is linked to the cost of energy, and manages this incredible feat of linking the physical world and of commodities with real costs to the digital space through the process of proof of work. Anyway, that was not on my radar at all.
Mm.
Uh, in 2017 into 2018, I believed that these altcoin innovations were real and could continue to chip away at the incumbent positions of Bitcoin and then Ethereum too. And so at the at the bottom of the 2018 bear market, I still had hope. I still had a sliver of conviction that these altcoins would recover, but mostly I was starting to get into like really just hope territory that these altcoins would recover. And what actually finally did it was off the bottom in spring 2019, Bitcoin rallied, and there's a lot of speculation that was in hindsight, because driven by the plus token scam in China, that was gobbling up a lot of supply and drove that rally. But for whatever reason, Bitcoin rallied, and the altcoins I was in, didn't. So that hope, that lingering hope that when the market recovered, these altcoins with higher beta would outperform Bitcoin on the upside, as they had in 2017. They had also had higher beta in 2018 on the downside, and so the hope was that when the market recovered, they would have higher upside again, but they didn't, and that kind of dissolved the remnants of my thesis in crypto in general and altcoins. And then I was forced to try to understand why the hell was Bitcoin, what I had come to understand as a boring, antiquated, the origination of this technology trend, but a terribly limited and archaic version of these, fancy, flashy crypto projects that had followed. Why was it doing better? And that forced me to consider. At that moment in time, the stock to flow model was getting a lot of attention. Had just come out, really, and I spent months trying to think through, like, I at no point did I think that the specific numbers attached to the stock to flow model was necessarily going to pan out that way, but I felt that directionally this makes sense, that more scarce assets are better at propagating value through time, and therefore they attract more value to be stored in them, and that the size of that store value bucket is in some way directly related to its capacity to propagate through time undiluted through inflation or issuance. So that was going around at that time, and it was making sense. And then I read the Bitcoin Standard in spring 2019, and that, like, caused a
Boom.
sort of crisis for me, because it was this assault on everything that I thought I knew about economics. It went further than that and, like, attacked my liberal sensibilities of how the world worked and what is good in culture and art and all these other things. That was such a relentless onslaught of a heavy barrage of libertarian thinking, really, that it bowled me over and caused a ton of cognitive dissonance for me to have to wade through and try to figure out, why does some of this make sense? Why does some of this, like, seem like such a simple, clean explanation for some of the things that I previously didn't have an explanation for in the sort of Keynesian sense? so from that was probably the moment where I started to like peer into the looking glass, and then the rabbit hole sucks you in. And over the following months, I went through the looking glass, and now I've been on the other side in orange pilled Bitcoin land for the last 3 years or so. Increasingly starting to forget what it's like to be on the other side of the looking glass, you know?
Wow. It's an amazing story. Thank you. There's yeah, I mean I say this almost every show, but there's lots of similarities to people's journeys, but then equally everything is unique because everyone's doing different stuff to different people in different parts of the world with different backgrounds. And how everyone seems to piece the puzzle together is different. And it's always different things that happen that made them think of, oh, what does that mean? Or how did that happen? Well, that doesn't make sense. And these questions start appearing in what you felt was a pretty kind of like straightforward view of life and what probably one needed to do with their life. And at which point, like, there's lots of detail I'd love to dig into there. But you mentioned a couple of things that are more kind of base layer. So you were a management consultant, and that you'd gone to do an MBA. So funny enough, I'm friends with some management consultants. I've been through the startup world for a few years, been through accelerators with people that were at places like McKinsey and Bain. And I've met this kind of character before, and they're super smart, great commercial awareness, having been in tons of different environments where they had to kind of come up with different strategies, and they write excellently. So when I read your articles, which were brilliant from my perspective, understanding Bitcoin for what it is, in particular, I love the article about why does the yuppie elite dismiss Bitcoin, because it just resonated straight away. I'm like, okay, I know tons of people like this. And I was like, the guy's a management consultant. He must be. And of course, it turns out you actually are, but you were anonymous online. So I had no idea, what you were doing. So teach me a bit about, like, how did you get into management consulting? And was it something that you always wanted to do? And for those that don't understand what it is, like, what is that job and what does it teach you about the world?
Yeah. Wow. I guess I haven't thought about that in quite some time. So I worked at Bain and Company, one of the three large premier firms in the world for management consulting. And a simple explanation of management consulting would just be that it's a place that C-level executives in large companies can go hire talent to figure out a direction on some hairy problem that they either don't have the resources, they don't have the manpower, or don't have the chops to um, get a good answer on and feel confident that they're going in the right direction. So that can mean that typically means one of two things. Like you're either trying to help a company grow its revenue, grow its profitability, really. Well, grow its revenue is sort of an easier way to understand this, by entering a new market or taking more of a market they're already competing in. Or you're trying to help them cut costs and therefore increase profitability based on the revenue that they're already getting. So, and obviously, those are two very broad questions. Like, how do you get more revenue, or how do you cut costs? Because there's a bunch of different answers to all that, and it's a kind of zoomed out view of things in general, which forces you to take like a high level diagnostic, and then develop a nose for value. And this is kind of the phrase that we like to use when you're trying to figure out like where is there an opportunity, and you're looking at 100 different things, but something feels out of place, or doesn't quite sense check in terms of the size of it, or the difficulty of it or something. Then you double click on that and spend more time there to figure out, okay, what's the size of this opportunity, and how achievable is it, and all that. So I realize that's pretty ambiguous description, but that's the problem with management consulting, is it's a wide range of different possible services that you're kind of thrown in there to help with, usually in like a team of 5 people. So there'd be a manager, and then 4 associates thrown at a problem um, for 3 months, maybe 6 months, maybe 12 months. And you make a lot of slides, and you spend the rest of your time in Excel So you get really good at those two things,
Mm.
and you get good at storytelling through slides, and you get good at writing emails. That's management consulting in a boiled
That,
down
and
view.
Jesse, like it might seem like you gave a very vague answer, but to me, it's extremely insightful in that you were a highly trained professional to look at scenarios, work out what's interesting, what's not interesting, and where's the value. And the
Yep.
story that you told at the start of this conversation already about ending up in the crypto space and being interested in this new technology that's been built on top of Ethereum, and then all these ERC20 tokens you can buy, and all this stuff that sounds so cool. And eventually you've ended up at Bitcoin. And to
Hmm.
my mind, that's just an embellishment of what you were taught as a management consultant, which is find the value, focus on that. And that's exactly what you just described. And that to me is what I find so interesting about the people that end up adopting Bitcoin in a major way. It's like, who were they? What were they doing? And to my mind, the fact that you've ended up at Bitcoin ultimately, it's like, look, people can invest their money in whatever they want. But the thing that you really want to pay attention to and to have possibly the largest allocation to is this thing, Bitcoin. And that's what
Yeah.
your previous mindset had helped you figure out. What were some of the like tough parts of that job? Did you enjoy it? And why did you decide to go and do an MBA?
Yeah. Well, one of the tough parts about it was there's a joke that gosh, it's been a while, so I might garble this, but it, yeah, we would like to compare ourselves to investment bankers who
Mhm.
have it worse, but management consulting is not great itself. Uh, if you have a girlfriend when you start management consulting, you if you don't if you sorry if you
That's
don't
right.
have a girlfriend when you start management consulting, you won't have a girlfriend when you're done.
Yeah.
And if you have a girlfriend when you start investment banking, you won't have one when you're done.
Wow.
So you
Okay.
don't have a life in those two industries, basically.
Wow.
Investment banking being worse. So that was probably the hardest part about it is that your typical life is that you are on the road. So part of the business model of all this is that the management consultants are based in major metropolitan areas and oftentimes are being hired by companies or divisions of companies that are not in metropolitan areas. And so the implication there is sort of that they don't necessarily have the same level of talent for business problem solving.
Hmm.
So like, I spent time in Northeast Louisiana, like my first project, working, on a telecommunications project there, finding cost buckets to find savings in. So that's a hard part of it. Your weekly schedule is pretty brutal. You'll fly out on like Sunday night to the client, and then you're there through Thursday evening, and then you fly back, and then Friday you're in your home office, and that's like the only time that you get to socialize with your peers or talk to mentors or whatever. And then Saturday you might let off some steam, and then Sunday it's you know do some errands in the morning and then get on a flight in the afternoon to go and
Yeah.
do it
Boom.
again.
Wow.
So that saps your years pretty quick. Like the years kind of fly by. In addition to that, like the work is hard. The amount of iterations that you have to do. You joke about how your PowerPoint slide deck ends up with final version number 36 dash final part two. You know dash actually this one.
Volume
uh,
369.
yeah.
Wow.
So you just end up with a lot of work and rework, a lot of slide making that doesn't end up seeing the light of day. But then there are those rewarding things too, where like I was on a project where I made one slide that the head of this division, this multi-billion dollar, it was like a $10 billion annual revenue division. This guy carried around this slide in his pocket. Like he folded it up and put it in his pocket and carried it around because it gave him exactly what he needed to justify acquiring another company, which they then did a year later. So a year after I made that slide, they ended up acquiring this multi-billion-dollar company, because that one slide gave him exactly what he needed to
Wow.
justify that here's this growth area that we are not yet equipped to do, but acquiring this company would be perfect for it. So, insofar as you can derive satisfaction from, a news update that a company bought a company,
Mm.
um, a year after you left, that's satisfying. But management consulting is hard. There's a lot of work. It is rewarding. You get very good at things, and it is probably the one of the best accelerants for your career that you can possibly do. So it all nets out to being worthwhile, but it is a grind.
Well, and it's, we're the sum of our experiences. So had you not gone and done that, you wouldn't have learned all those things. You wouldn't be able to, know what you know now. But equally, like, what does it feel like to be trudging to the fucking airport on a Sunday night to like go to somewhere
Yeah,
else again? Like, you knew maybe that that's something you didn't want. And we'll cycle
yeah,
back to this later because I have a question from what you just mentioned. But I'm intrigued as to the MBA choice. So it's something that I've toyed with many times. I just never ended up doing it because I just didn't know why I was doing it. I didn't have a good reason to actually go and do it. So, where did you end up doing your MBA? Why did you go and do that? And, a lot of the time people say, oh, you go just to build a network or something along those lines. So, what was that like for you?
yeah. I went to Stanford. When you're in the management consulting world, you know that you have a clean window after 3 years there to take a shot at the top MBA programs. So pretty much everybody ends up applying and seeing if they get in somewhere.
That's what you
I
did. Was it
guess,
three years and then you went to do an MBA or?
yeah, I did 3 years MBA, and then I came back to Bain for a year. But during that year, I was getting like swept up more and more in crypto, so
Mm.
eventually left. Yeah. So what was your? So
No,
you wanted to know
I'm
where, and then.
wondering, I'm wondering, you decided to go and do an MBA.
Mhm.
Why was that? And what was the
Mm,
experience like?
right. Yeah, part of it was just that you have a good opportunity to do that and broaden your network and expose yourself to some other things, and hopefully take a crack at like finding a startup to join and be a part of and
Okay.
grow. And on top of that, you're hoping to learn stuff you don't know and get exposed to professors who could help shape your career, or be valuable contacts or even friends into the future. And so I basically applied with that sort of aspiration of this will be a great opportunity if I'm the right fit, if I'm the right fit for what Stanford is looking for as they're composing this next class. And I think my background studying neuroscience and then being at Bain, and at that time I thought that a frontier that would be very interesting and rewarding was neurotech. So like brain um, neuron machine interface, that stuff, particularly relevant for medical devices and who knows what future applications. That was my interest. And then in the first few months where I was at Stanford, I sought out the like uh, health tech panels and resources at Stanford, and symposiums, and quickly realized that there's so much red tape in this space that you would spend an entire career just dealing with red tape, trying to move anything forward. And that just took the wind out of my sails on that, possible future. I think it's probably not surprising to people who are in Bitcoin that being dragged down in those kind of pedantic details and suffering through red tape is not exciting to the type of person who ends up being very interested in Bitcoin. Who's, I think, on balance, we are big picture thinkers, and you know and dreamers, really, and not so much detail oriented types.
Definitely the case. Yeah.
Yeah, and so the experience overall at school was a very fun experience. I had more fun than I was expecting. I think I learned less than I was expecting. I think the reality of it was that I had already learned one of the things they say about management consulting is it's an on the ground, um, a boots on the ground MBA. And I think that's quite true, because you end up learning everything you really need to know about accounting or financial statements or how to get shit done. And you don't really realize the extent to which when you show up at an MBA program, you are more prepared and polished than the majority of your classmates, or
Mm.
at least, coming from other industries. And there's some of them who are coming from non-traditional backgrounds who actually get a lot of value out of the classes, when you go through accounting and finance and you learn that stuff. But I had already gotten an accounting degree, so
Mhm.
I didn't really learn anything in my accounting and finance classes, because I'd already had that stuff. So that was kind of a surprise that I learned less than I expected in class. I had probably a little too much fun. It is a bit of a party, and
I mean, considering the lifestyle that you've explained already, the management consultant, like doing 3 years of that schedule you mentioned, like
yep,
it's not like you hadn't worked your nuts off for a period of
yeah,
time. Like, do you know, like take the excuse, like have a good time, like
yeah,
definitely.
yeah. And I fully embraced that. I think oddly though, I came out of that on the other side of it less motivated. Like I was a less capable employee
Mm,
than I was when I
interesting.
went to business school, because it had like restored some of the like joie de vivre
Yeah,
in me,
yeah.
and I didn't
You
really want
suddenly
to
have
go
some
back to.
freedom to like do what you want with your time, and you're like, what do I do with
Yep,
my spare time? Well, I actually go and socialize with people and do whatever. Do you know what I mean? You don't work like a
yep.
dog for a corporation.
A big part
Um,
of that too is you just don't have. It's very very hard to maintain like a fitness regimen when
yep.
you're traveling for consulting, and so like my fitness had been like a slow, gentle decline over the 3 years that I had been there. And so then going back to school and like, getting back into lifting and swimming and getting fit again felt so good. And I didn't want to lose that again. So, coming back to the consulting world, I was determined to prioritize working out, kind of at the expense of being the level of good soldier that you're expected to be in consulting.
Mm,
Yeah.
awesome. No, thanks, Jesse, for sharing that. So, one thing that, well, I mean, there's just so many things that you've mentioned I'd love to talk about. You said you studied neuroscience. You also managed to get an accounting degree in there at some point. Like, how you managed to do all these things, I'm not quite sure, but we'll save those for another conversation. What people are really interested in by this podcast is obviously people's journeys to Bitcoin. So, we'll focus on that as much as we can. So, what excites me here is, and this is purely just from brand alone, but like Bain, top brand. Stanford MBA, top brand. Okay, what's great about Bitcoin? Well, anyone can join it anywhere in the world. There's all these different characteristics to it as a network that we like. But I'm someone that is managing my own money, like an inheritance from my father's early death. And one of the things that Bitcoin struggles with, in my opinion, is legitimacy. Like there is just so many people like myself. They're like, scam, not even looking at it. And you're like, well, you haven't even researched it. Have you read any of this stuff? Do you know what it actually is? Like, what is money? And they're like, don't care, scam. And you're like, okay, fine, fuck you. I'll go and talk to someone else like yourself, Jesse, that wants to talk about it. Like, let's have a chat about it. But the point of all this being is, you're super smart if you've been able to work at Bain for a few years and you do a Stanford MBA, and now you've become a huge Bitcoin bull. Okay, that's interesting. Like other people should take notice of that, right? And for me, that helps build my conviction in it in terms of long-term value creation. Talk a bit about some of the difficulties you've had. Like, so obviously you're an anonymous profile, and now you've decided to come out and mention your name in public. And I believe you're going to be building a business in the space of some form. So, what's that been like? There's probably a bit of torment. Like, you've got this traditional way of thinking, and suddenly you've got this new way of thinking, and actually telling your friends and family about it, people think you're fucking psycho. I don't know. There's lots of questions kind of packed into that in a sense, but I'm just intrigued as to how that process has been of going from being an anonymous Bitcoin account to being openly public about it. And when you come from a background like a management consultant like yourself, and with that pedigree of education, a lot of people are like immediately closing doors, basically.
Yeah. There's of course a ton there. And I think has been if I had to to say what my greatest contribution to Bitcoin has been, I think it has been my own wrestling with trying to figure out some of these themes, and then packaging up my thinking into the Yuppie Elite article,
Mm.
which is just an exploration of the same problem of my very qualified, smart MBA friends being completely dismissive of Bitcoin, and finding that so fascinating and frustrating, and trying to explain to myself what was happening. As you know, the conclusion I came to is that it's really a two by two matrix, to borrow the framework from the classic management consulting approach of you have trust and you have IQ, trust in the system and intelligence. And MBAs are high trust in the system and high intelligence. And Bitcoiners are low trust in the system and high intelligence. But of course, there's also this other group of people who are into Bitcoin because they think that because it has gone up a lot, it'll go up more, which is not a good reason to be into Bitcoin. It's kind of the uninformed, the unintelligent approach to Bitcoin. And those people are bullish on Bitcoin too. So why is it that you have this strange grouping of very smart Bitcoiners and a lot of pretty dumb people who have crypto? Really, those are people who don't differentiate between Bitcoin and crypto. And then the professional class, the MBAs, are looking at these two groups, and they see them as one. They see them as people who are into crypto, and frankly, there's more of the dumbasses who are who are betting on Dogecoin or Shiba Inu, but they also have some Bitcoin, and they fall for the unit bias stuff, and they fall for past performance. It, in their minds, is indicative of future results. So that's part of why the professional class, a big part of it is they're looking out at the crypto landscape, and they're seeing all this crazy hype and buzz, and none of it is rooted in fundamentals. And at best, there's some flimsy narratives about real world adoption in supply chains. We're going to track cantaloupe with blockchain. you know
Mm.
what the hell is that? And
Yeah, like
surely that's not
supply
worth
chain
$1 billion.
transparency type stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the professional class is trying to wrap their head around how does this impact the real world, and crypto is offering up these use cases that are flimsy at best. Like like supply chain tracking, or NFTs. We're going to dematerialize art, but retain ownership of art. And people are kind of scratching their head. The professionals are scratching their heads, like, I don't know that makes sense, but we'll wait and see. We'll watch from the sidelines.
Mm.
And of course, Bitcoin gets lumped in with all that because if you're not spending time learning about crypto and Bitcoin in particular, you're not spending time peeling the onion to find out that, okay, on the surface, this thing is sketchy because it's young and it is rebellious. But when you peel back that surface level of the onion, and that dirty peel, and then you realize actually there's structure and layers here, and that's true with Bitcoin. Of, oh wow, this has merit, this has very deliberate design, and this is actually not malleable. Like everyone assumes that Bitcoin can be changed. Everyone assumes there's some group of programmers who control it because we have no basis for comparison. So I think that's part of what yuppies, the professional class, struggles with, is they've gotten very good at developing a set of heuristics for what has value in the business world, in the world of money, in the world of value. What are the things that drive value? And they're very familiar with how businesses and business leaders can implement policies and steer a ship, and spit off free cash flows that have a value. And Bitcoin has none of these things.
Mm.
So it literally doesn't line up with any prior comparison, any example that these business people have quite a catalog of examples. Like in business school, you spend every class going through a case study of some business that had some problem and addressed it with some solution. And through all these examples, you're developing a body of knowledge about how to navigate particular problems when operating a business or navigating the world of value in general. And Bitcoin, you know, doesn't check any of those boxes at all whatsoever because there's no leadership. First
Mm.
and foremost, there's
Mm.
and so without any prior example, it seems much more likely that it's just a scam, that it is in some way flawed, that is doomed because for quite some time I thought that since Bitcoin didn't have any ability to steer the ship, you can easily imagine a ship that is on a course and cannot be steered. That doesn't end well, right? Like you don't know where that
Mm.
terminates, but it terminates at some point. And so even that mental model doesn't do it justice because it's not a ship trying to get anywhere. It's a set of constants that just have to remain constant.
Mhm.
It's just all that Bitcoin is relying on is that human self-interest remains a primary motivator for human action, and math remains true.
Right.
And that is very different from how business people view the world and
Mm.
how they're trained to look at balance sheets and free cash flows
Mm.
and all of that stuff. So and in business school, you don't even talk about gold because gold doesn't have any utility in terms of it doesn't do anything. It doesn't have any economic activity associated with it. So it's just never talked about. It's a curiosity. It's a relic of the past. And since you're not talking about gold, you're not talking about scarcity or storing value. So yeah,
It's amazing, isn't
I
it?
think part of what lures MBAs and professionals into a false sense that they have the right tools to evaluate Bitcoin is that you're spending all this time in the business world learning about businesses and value, and yet you're at no point are you presented with the question of what is money,
Mm.
and at no point are you talking about how scarcity drives value for certain assets, um, or exploring why that is. So the MBAs think they have the full toolkit when really they got half of it.
So I took a business management degree as well, although not to MBA or level such as yourself, but I'm the same. I was never ever taught anything but how to make money. You never questioned what is money. So the business case studies you describe, they're basically just how to make money. How do you make money? And then that's basically how do you actively make money within the system that's provided. You never stop, take a step back and say, well, what is the system?
Mhm.
And that's so interesting because at some point, when you ask that question, and Robert Breedlove, shout out to him, amazing podcast, asking that question all the time, there's millions of different answers to what is money. But it's a very, very, very base structure to all society over the history of mankind. And it's failed multiple, multiple times. And, you're interested in startups and health tech, and I've had a number of interests in other startups as well. But I never sat down and gone, hang on, what about the money that we're using? And when you start talking about disrupting central banks, it's like, well, hang on a second. Money's a big fucking problem. And what is money? And boom, down you go
Yep.
into this hole of like, okay, this is mad. And so I imagine there was a day, Jesse, where you go, okay, this is something that I want to dedicate my time to. Can you think back to that moment? And what have you done since you decided to really focus on Bitcoin?
Hmm. Yeah, so there was the false epiphany of there's a huge opportunity starting a crypto fund,
Hmm.
which
Hmm.
is what I did in when I left Bain. I started a crypto fund
Oh,
in
okay.
summer 2017, and that was really on the basis of having friends and family and my broader network who were interested in invest alongside what I was already doing, basically. And that was a false epiphany because I didn't have that was me investing based on a technology thesis
Mm.
at the end of the day. And then the 2018 bear market and Bitcoin's rally off the bottom, leaving altcoins behind in 2019.
So you actually had a
Forced,
fund at that stage. So you were, actively
yep,
investing, and you persuaded people to give you money, and the market didn't go the way you expected. Wow. Okay. I
yeah,
didn't realize you were that kind of invested in that thesis. Interesting.
yeah, oh yeah, yeah. So I mean,
Mate, that's skin in the game though. And you learn.
yep,
Like, some of the great lessons in life are when you lose, right? And they're tuition fees on the way to where you are today. And that's, again, what a brilliant, you've highlighted wonderfully for me. Thank you. Bitcoin is the one that's most important to spend time studying about first.
yeah,
And here's another explanation why. So sorry, I've interrupted
yeah.
you, but
No,
so you had a crypto fund. Holy shit. And so it blew up basically, or you just
oh,
decided to wind it down,
well,
or
it got hammered, and then
fuck.
it got hammered, but that drawdown, it didn't kill it necessarily. And then I was scrambling to figure out, like, okay, maybe there's something I'm missing here because Bitcoin is rallying and my altcoins are not, but that doesn't make sense with the thesis that I had. So what am I missing about Bitcoin? And then when you were talking about, you don't learn about money in school, I think one of the best recommendations for MBA types, sort of a nice gradual introduction to Bitcoin stuff, is to have people read really just the beginning of Ray Dalio's The Changing World Order. The
Yeah,
first
that's
couple
very good.
chapters
Yeah.
are fantastic. It sets up how money has changed over history. And in fact, there's a clean cycle of every 100 years or so, a new reserve currency rising and falling.
Mhm.
And lo and behold, we haven't gotten out of that. We're sort of living through the decline of the US dollar. That's kind of what you learn there. And then right after that, I read Jeff Booth's Price of Tomorrow.
Excellent book as
And
well.
that sort of just shows you why the US dollar structurally is extra doomed, basically, like
Mm.
particularly doomed because it is trying to fight the gravity of technological deflation. How you get more for less when technology is helping industries improve their products,
Mm.
and that has been especially true in the internet era. So that sequence really kind of, I don't know, drove many cracks into the dam, and then the Bitcoin standard was the tsunami as the dam broke for me. Yeah, so I ran this crypto fund. I still run it because it transitioned to a Bitcoin fund as I was forced to try to figure out what am I missing, and then in this rush of reading, I undid my Stanford MBA.
Wow.
And so I had to I had gone through such terrible pain in the altcoin drawdown, and I was prepared to accept that I was prepared to entertain sacrilege in my professional career. Right, I was prepared to go to that place and consider maybe the Bitcoin maximalists who have been so toxic and unpleasant whenever I've encountered them online. Maybe there's something there that I'm missing.
Mm.
And so it was only in that, when I was laid low in my investment thesis, that I was prepared to open my mind enough to think, okay, maybe everything I ever learned about business is wrong.
Wow.
And that's what it took for me to get to the other side of the looking glass. It took me being prepared to admit that I was wrong about Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the innovation. It's not about technology. It's about money. The US dollar is doomed. Keynesian economics is wrong. It's always been about Austrian economics. And and that leads you to an even more despairing place, because if Keynesian economics is wrong and Austrian economics is right, then you have to ask yourself, why have I only learned about Keynesian economics. These were two competing schools of economic thinking 100 years ago. And one of them has been almost
Wiped out.
entirely wiped out. It's the one that's right. So how did that happen? And then you start to realize the sinister incentives in place with money printing, with central banking,
Mm.
and the connection to politics with central banking, that politicians are interested in justifications for printing money because it's very popular and enables them to do things. And they want reasons to say yes to that. And they don't want reasons to say no to that. And so Keynesian economics provided the reasons why stimulating the economy is good. And Austrian economics provided the reasons why it's a bad idea. And here we are 100 years later, and you never hear anything about Austrian economics in school. It's only ever the butt of a joke.
And that makes one wonder, what else did I get taught in school that's been influenced by someone that gets something from me that I haven't even realized? It's a
Yeah.
whole. It's basically, it's a completely life-changing moment.
Yep.
Like, the whole trajectory of your life changes, doesn't it? Your thinking changes, and as your thinking changes, you change.
And in that process is ultimately your trust in the system unraveling right in front of you. And that reaches every part of how you I guess in our modern world, we're taught in schools somehow effectively instill in us that the way forward is a sort of collectivist. We're in this together. Modernity improves through collective effort and the collaboration of industry and government. All these notions, and part of that is that government is staffed by people with your interests at heart, who are civil servants doing good for the world, and that they are implementing policy based on what is in the public interest. And then you come across this central banking story, and you dig in enough to learn about how the Fed was formed, how it was pushed through in an overnight session over Christmas after 100 years of our nation's leaders warning that this was the greatest risk to the country, and failed attempts for 100 years. And then it goes through the collaboration of private banking interests whose ownership of the Fed is not ever fully disclosed. Holy shit, how is that possible?
Crazy, isn't it? It's really crazy.
Yeah, and so in that example, that bald-faced example of how the civil servants at the Fed, these unelected officials, they don't derive their mandate from public good. They derive it from some private interest that goes back to the formation of the Fed, since it everything in the 100 years before then was saying, like, this would be a terrible thing for the country, and yet it goes through because of the interests of some very powerful bankers. So yeah, you have that example with the Fed, and then you start to question everything else about the food pyramid.
Yeah, what the fuck is that?
What the fuck is that about? What's the FDA, the CDC, and of course you have COVID policies hit the last few years that happen to align chronologically with much of my orange pilling. And that makes you start to question where where are those policies coming from, and are they in the public good, or are they some combination of public good and private interest, and who and what percentage of what, and it starts to get murky, and as it gets murky, you start to lose trust in more of the establishment and more of the status quo. And the whole process amounts to, in my example, I moved from the top right quadrant of this trust and intelligence quadrant, and as my trust unraveled, I moved over to low trust in the system, but still intelligent. So now I'm with all the Bitcoiners,
Yeah.
the people who are in that corner, the Bitcoiners, the Bitcoin maximalists. You see them on Twitter and they're hostile as all hell, cynical as all hell. They're prone to conspiracy theories because they've dug in enough to see the darkness at the heart of central banking, and they don't trust everything else that's coming out of government as a result.
Mm.
To varying degrees. I think I'm less extreme than many Bitcoin maximalists on that front, but I certainly trust the establishment a lot less than I used to. I used
Mm.
to just hook, line, and sinker believe in the advancing humanity through really the liberal policies that I believed in, and now question. I question both sides. I question everything about all of that because it's no longer to me a matter of left versus right. Now it seems more like individual sovereignty
Mm.
versus top down mandate. And I feel like that is the real battle. And Bitcoin is a very interesting breakthrough and a declaration of monetary independence. So I don't know. That's a whole lot of different thoughts that I've been
We
I've
could
been
have
reflecting on more recently about
Jesse.
about my journey.
We could have a 3 hour long conversation. There's no doubt about it. I have to resonate with you on the COVID side of things in terms of like how much of a wake up call that's been. Like I haven't had someone invade my private space like that before. You can't leave your house. I'm in Melbourne, Australia, which is one of the most ludicrous COVID zero policy places, globally. It was a real hit to the face. It's like, well, who's in charge? Why are they in charge? Why are the rules what the rules are? Oh, mate, you can't ask questions. Public health policy is more important than the individual. Who the
Hmm.
fuck said that? I disagree. And then you
Right.
disagree, and suddenly, I'll tell you a small story. My wife and I, we went to some protests. The protests were illegal because the chief health officer of Melbourne and the state of Victoria said that you couldn't leave your house more than 5 kilometers. And we ended up with police on the front doorstep knocking on the door, and they'd got pictures off social media, and they were like to my wife, "You were at the protest, we've got pictures of you." And they tried to take her to court and fine her. Now 18 months later, these charges were just dropped this week. We got a letter because she contested them.
Wow.
She said no way. But it was madness. It was like, hang on, we disagree with these rules, let us out of our home. And the government decided to turn Melbourne into a police state and start fining people. It's crazy, mate. So
Yeah.
yeah, I really resonate on that spot as to like, okay, that was a kind of kick in the face from one direction, and then I'm deep down the money hole, and you're like, well, hang on, what the hell is money? And here we
Hmm.
are. I'm starting a Bitcoin podcast, and I'm on an amazing journey. It's been so fascinating who I've met and who I get to speak to. An hour has absolutely flown by, Jesse, and I normally
Yeah.
try and shoot for just an
Wow.
hour. We could easily do a couple of these. Thank you so much for sharing your time with me today. I had some audience questions, which I think we'll just make this a quick one. It comes from
Yeah. Sure.
JPN Ledger, and I think it's totally fair enough. He says, "What's his favorite article and why?" Of the
Yeah.
of the articles you wrote, what's your favorite article and why?
Yeah. I saw that one. I saw that one on your Twitter, and it kind of struck me. I don't really know because I think the three that stand out for me are Yuppie Elite, American West, and
Hmm.
then a lesser known one for me, Asset DNA. And I like them for different reasons. I think the Yuppie Elite speaks to the sociological phenomenon of getting into Bitcoin, and that's sort of contemporaneous. And American West is a historical exploration of how a former frontier, the American West, how it developed and what that looked like, what the trajectory of that looked like. And the analogy extends to how Bitcoin is still very early in its development trajectory and adoption curve. And then Asset DNA, I think, was my best summarization of why Bitcoin is the best asset on the planet to have in your portfolio, just by looking at the inherent properties of different asset classes and calling attention to how, because of increasing scarcity, Bitcoin has a leg up on every other investment asset out there, and certainly over depreciating assets or consumption. So yeah, to answer which one is my favorite of those, I guess it sort of depends on what mood I'm in on what day.
Yeah,
Um,
fair enough.
yeah,
I love the historical reference to the Midwest, and Tour de Mister's written an excellent article about the the Reformation and the invention of the printing press and how influential that was on Northern Europe at the time. And somehow historical context, Robert Breedlove's article about the invention of zero being another one, just really hammers home in a way that you can relate to. It's like, oh, okay, holy shit, well, whoa, really? And I really love those kind of historical contextual ones. Well, Jesse, listen, where can people reach out and get in touch with you if they want to? And I believe you're starting a business, so if you want to shill that as well, then go ahead.
yeah. Well, I'm
Or
I'm
still the same
looking to.
business, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I'm coming out publicly because I'm running this business, this fund of mine, and looking to see growth areas or other opportunities. So we'll see on that front. I'm very active on Twitter. I'm very bad at DMs, but I'm active on Twitter. You can find me at Croesus, CROESUS_BTC. And you can check out, I've sort of organized all my work in a pinned tweet there. So if you're curious about any of this, you can find it all there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for spending some time with me today, Jesse. And I'm sure people will get huge value from hearing your story. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jake. It's been fun.
Okay, friends, nice work. You made it all the way to the end of the episode. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this conversation. As I said at the start, if you have any questions, then please don't hesitate to reach out. And if you enjoyed the episode, then please rate, like, subscribe, and share. That's it for now. Enjoy the rest of your day. All the best, Jake.